I'm Hannah Glazier, and I will be presenting on the Hazelwood v. Kohlmeyer Supreme Court decision. The First Amendment grants Americans freedom of speech and freedom of press, so the legality of censorship is called under question. For example, at Drake High School, Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five was censored by the principal, and Kurt Vonnegut retorts this censorship by saying, "If you're an American, you must allow all ideas to circulate freely in your community, not merely your own." The issue of opposing viewpoints being mislabeled as offensive viewpoints is looked into by Jacob Pusha, Pew Research Center. He says that recent generations, specifically millennials, look more favorably onto government censorship than other generations. Censorship extends into high school publications as well. In fact, in 1988, the Supreme Court ruled its decision that high school publications are under prior review and prior restraint, which effectively restrains students' First Amendment rights. However, after looking at multiple perspectives and evidence, I have found that these restrictions have been so negative and restrictive that anti-Hazelwood legislation must be enacted. The intention of the ruling, according to Justices White, Rehnquist, Stevens, and O'Connor, is that student journalists are not entitled to the same rights as professional journalists because freedom of expression has the potential to interfere with the effectiveness of schools' pedagogical functions, basically meaning that freedom of expression can be a disruption to the learning environment. However, this ruling contains a lot of historical hypocrisy, as First Amendment rights have been critical to the American society. In fact, Susanna Tobin, who's a first-year legal research advisor and Harvard Law graduate, argues that schools should teach our students to respect that freedom is a simple matter of completing the syllogism. However, teaching students to respect freedom of expression, but simultaneously not allowing them to practice it, verges on this do as I say, but not as I do hypocrisy. And this hypocrisy has serious implications because it leads to more censorship. In fact, the Student Law Press Center, which is an organization dedicated to advocating for students who feel that their First Amendment rights have been compromised, had calls to the center rise 12% right after the ruling. And then in 1990, a year after the ruling, calls were up 170%. And from 1988 to 2003, calls asking for help were increased by 350%. Clearly, this shows that the increased censorship led to the reinforced power of high school administrators' jurisdiction over high school publications. But what happens with more censorship is that students stop writing conversation-inspiring pieces or controversial topics because they fear that either A, it won't make it to print because they'll get censored, or B, it will get them in trouble with administrators. And as a result of this, John Stegler, chairman of the Freedom Forum, a First Amendment rights organization, found in a survey that 72% of 233 student newspapers were either average or boring. And that study also showed that the school principals had rejected newspaper articles or required changes over time. And because of all of this censorship, students lose their ability to effectively learn the values and ethics of journalism, like verifying facts, considering opposing viewpoints, and taking responsibility for one's rights. And so Frank D. Lamont, the executive director of the Student Press Law Center, asserts that the students who have been censored then enter the job market unprepared. He supports this with a study, and it found that in a national survey of 154 Scholastic Press Association directors, 71% of the respondents agreed with the statement that high school journalists do not have a solid understanding of the laws and ethics of journalism. And what this leads to is that professional journalism publications will soon find their ranks filled with freshly minted journalism school graduates inadequately prepared to pursue controversial stories aggressively and endure the backlash therefrom, thus showing that the intentions are overwhelmingly too negative because it leads to limitations and implications. So, the evidence in multiple perspectives warrants the resounding conclusion that the decision had an overwhelmingly negative impact on high school press and journalists. Clearly, this needs to be reformed. One way we could do this is hoping that a state Supreme Court case would render the ruling that that the state affords more rights than the U.S. Constitution does. However, this is extremely uncertain because A, this would require a legislation and statewide popular vote, which is a timely and tedious process. There are attorney expenses, and it would divide the states up, as well as who knows if we'll actually have a Supreme Court case that will make it to the Supreme Court. So the better option is to pass anti-Hazelwood legislation. This would effectively institute the power of the law, would require a simple majority of vote, and has a minimal chance of being overturned if drafted properly. This would hopefully establish the written student expression policies and grant institutions tort and criminal immunity for student expression. And a plausible way of implementing this is imitating the California law, which grants students general responsibility for their rights and only allows schools to censor if they can prove that this would disrupt this learning environment. All in all, by passing this statute, students will finally be able to legally function as a form of students' ideas and cultivate information rather than that of administrators. Thank you for your time.